What's up guys, Intelitech Studios here, and today we're going to be doing the full review of the Eureka TheBoss Power Plus. This model is model 4703, and it is also known, this exact style of machine that is also known as the Eureka Lightspeed, not to be confused with the Whirlwind Lightspeed, and the Eureka Maxima. Now the difference between all those units is not very much. There are some versions of this machine that have a wider base, an onboard turbo brush in this spot, and some versions also have a headlight down here and a clear little slot in the side of the base where you can view the belt. Other than that, every single model of this machine is 100% identical in terms of its functionality and whatnot. So, this particular machine is actually a Frankenstein machine that I built out of two different units. This originally was a black and blue machine, but it had some problems with it, and I had a green and white machine that I used for parts, and essentially used both of the parts to build one good machine out of two bad ones. So that's basically why the color on this is a little bit funky and not exactly the exact color that you will find of many of these machines in the wild. So this particular machine I've been using for the last few days. Well, actually, more so just today. I used it a bunch today, and then I used it a little bit a few months ago. And this machine has been pretty okay, I guess. But basically, to run down the general view and my opinion on this machine, is that it's very, very loud. The filtration is very poor. It is very nice and lightweight, but it overall just isn't the best machine, and I do not plan on keeping this machine in my collection. So by the time you see this review, this machine will go up for sale. So this particular machine is also 12 amps, as you can see, and it takes a good amount of power, and this model, like I mentioned earlier, does not have a headlight. Instead of a headlight, it has a little stair cleaning handle underneath here, which does not seem all that practical, as this thing is very awkward to use on the stairs. And as far as trying to get up the stairs, the actual hose is not a stretch hose, but it loops all the way around the machine, so the air actually travels a good amount before it ends up in the canister. And this hose will only go up to about 6 steps before there is no further for it to go. And since it's not a stretch hose, it's not going to get all the way up the stairs unless you try to balance this thing on the stairs, which is very awkward to do. Now, as far as the attachments, this particular machine has an onboard dusting brush, which this dusting brush is not very good for dusting, and it's not very good for upholstery either. The bristles are a bit sparse, and they're very stiff. They're not even stiff, but they're just really coarse. So I wouldn't really recommend using this on any sort of delicate material, but it's also not the best to use as an upholstery tool either. So while this particular dusting brush doesn't do the best at either dusting or doing anything with upholstery, the nice thing is that if you have attachments from a nicer Eureka vacuum like Eureka Excalibur or Eureka Boss Smart Vac 4870, both of those tools, whether the dusting brush or the upholstery nozzle, will actually fit and work on this machine. So, for example, if you do have the dusting brush for one of those machines, you actually can grab that dusting brush and use it on this machine if you'd like. And in fact, even if you don't like this machine or this tool and you want to just kind of get rid of it and get one of these dusting brushes, which you can still find, it actually fits on board with no problems. So if you want to use a nicer dusting brush with this or an upholstery tool, you'd have to pick one or the other since there's only one slot on this model. But that is something that you can do, and you can get those tools and use them with this machine if your biggest issue is the quality of the dusting brush and upholstery nozzle. Now, as far as the extension wand and crevice tool, now these aren't the exact ones that this model would have came with, but they are pretty similar. And the extension wand is an okay length, and the crevice tool is actually pretty decently long. So, I mean, it does okay as far as reaching up into places, but since the actual hose doesn't stretch, the only way you're going to be able to reach up into corners, like if I'm trying to reach this entire upper corner of where my wall meets my ceiling, the only way that I would be able to get this to reach is by actually picking up the machine. So that is something you can do, but it is a little bit awkward. And one other thing that's interesting, if I put this wand back, is that the dusting brush this comes with actually does fit onto the end of the crevice tool. So if you want to use the dusting brush, you can actually use this. You can actually use the crevice tool as an extension wand, because there's a little hole in here. Let me turn the autofocus on. Because there's a little hole right here where the airflow goes through, and you can actually take the crevice tool and stick it in there, and it'll actually seal. You can see the crevice tool sticking out there, and it'll basically act as another extension wand for the dusting brush. It wouldn't be as long as a whole nother extension wand, but it is another way where you can get a little bit closer to being able to get up into high places with the included attachments. It's still not quite enough reach, and when you compare it to something like the Eureka TheBoss Smart Vac 4870, where you actually have two fully separate extension wands, it's not as good as that, but obviously it's a much cheaper unit, so I wouldn't really expect that. But you can buy extra extension wands for this, and many of the other Eureka accessories that do work with this machine, that work with Eurekas, like for example, things designed for the Eureka Mighty Mite, do work on this machine. So for example, if you have a Eureka Mighty Mite and you want to use the two extension wands to get a good amount of reach, or you want to use the included floor nozzle that comes with that machine to use this machine on bare floors, basically use it as an awkward canister, that is something you can do. Since the bare floor performance in this machine is non-existent otherwise, as there is no way to shut off the brush roll, and the brush roll is very aggressive, which is good for whenever you're deep cleaning carpets, but not good for doing anything with upholstery. So since we're on the topic of carpet cleaning, I figured I would do a carpet pickup test. Now, since I mentioned that you can't shut off the brush roll on this machine, there's no point in doing a bare floor pickup test, as there's no squeegee on the bottom, and there is no way to shut off the brush roll unless you completely remove the belt, and at that point it'd be a hassle to go back on the carpet. So we're going to forego the bare floor pickup test, but like I said earlier, if you do want to use the machine on bare floors, you can get the attachments that go with the Eureka Mighty Mite, and that will get you a set of extension wands and a floor tool that you can then use on bare floors. And there's no point in doing a bare floor test, since that'll obviously depend on what bare floor tool you use. So we're just going to focus on carpets. Another thing I'll mention real quick before we do this, but the way the machine is designed is a little bit bizarre, because the actual base is a lot further up off the ground than a lot of other machines that I've seen. So while my carpet is a fairly medium to high pile carpet, I kind of have to set this a lot lower than I normally would for it to maintain optimal contact with the floor. So that's really bizarre. It doesn't appear like it's any sort of design flaw with my machine. A lot of the other ones of these that I've owned over the years have had the same issue. And I will say that this machine is very loud, another thing I don't like about it. So headphone warning, this machine is rather noisy. So we're going to go ahead and turn this on and do the test. Again, very noisy. You have been warned. In 3, 2, 1. So the good news about this machine is that the agitation, much like every other cheap upright of this era, the brush roll agitation is really good, provided the brush roll in your machine is good, because remember, these machines are a few years old now, and this is no longer sold. But as far as the results, you could see the agitation. It was able to kind of vibrate some of the potato flakes, and as a result, that did allow a lot of them to kind of get jumped up into the machine. There are still a couple little flakes that I'm kind of seeing pop up as I mess with this carpet. See a couple more little flakes just popped out. See, here's a flake right there, flake right there, flake right there, flake right there, flake right there. Hole in my sock that I just now noticed. So we can see that there is a good amount. Well, I shouldn't say a good amount. There are a few of these flakes left behind, but it did get the vast majority of them. And I would say that that's not necessarily a bad result. Now, I have seen some machines do better, and then I've seen other machines do worse. So I would say this is about average. For your average budget machine of this age, it's fairly typical. I would probably see better out of something from the likes of Hoover, and maybe probably even Bissell, but it's perfectly adequate. I would say that the difference between the performance between this and adequate machines of the time, like the Bissell Power Force and a lot of the very entry-level Hoovers, like the Tempo, it's probably right within that range. I still think this does slightly worse than those machines, but it's about what you'd expect. And with a few more passes, all of these flakes will come up with no problems, so we will finish the task really quick. And since we're on the topic of deep cleaning carpets, I will also show the results of basically vacuuming with this machine twice in my living room. So I vacuumed once a few months ago. I actually did that video a while ago. And I just vacuumed again today, right before I did this video, and obviously the little bit that I just redid just now. So I didn't empty it in between those times, but I did empty it prior to that. So we can see there is a good amount of dust and dirt in this bin. So if we look at this bin right here, we can see all the potato flakes in there. Some of them are kind of sticking to the outside of the bin. You can see the static cling is kind of making some of them move around. But we can see the results right there. There is a good amount of dirt right there in the bin. We can see there's also a pleated filter right here in the bin. This is the only form of filtration that we get in the Cyclone. Or I guess Cyclone is kind of an incorrect way of putting it, as this is not a cyclonic machine. This is just a bagless machine with an uncovered filter in the dust cup. It's very similar to something that you'd see like the Dirt Devil Breeze or the much more premium Eureka Whirlwind Lightspeed. Again, not to be confused with the Eureka Lightspeed, which is what this machine is also known as, but the Whirlwind Lightspeed, which is a much higher end machine from Eureka, and one that is still sold to this day as a sanitaire. This particular filter does very poorly, in all honesty, when compared to a lot of those other filters. I think that the filter from Dirt Devil in the F1 filters in the Dirt Devil Breeze and some of the Featherlight units does a lot better at keeping the filter clean, because in the case of that machine, you can fill up the bin all the way up to almost the filter being completely covered, and it will still not lose suction. This one is already starting to lose suction a little bit because a lot of this dust has actually clung to the filter, and that's as a result of the filter being directly in the way of the air that's going into the bin. So you can see a lot of dust has actually flung itself into the pores of the filter just from being pulled directly to it within the air path. And the only thing that's really been able to fall down is the excess debris and all the large debris. So that's a little bit disappointing. The actual filtration on this machine is very abysmal, unfortunately, as this is the only filter that you have in protecting yourself from the emissions. There is no final post-motor filter on this machine, and I'll show you that real quick. There is no post-motor filter on this machine. If you actually look right in here, you can actually see the motor. So there's not only is there nothing filtering everything that happens beyond this filter, that also means that there is nothing filtering out the carbon dust that's coming off of the motor. So there's nothing there in terms of final filtration. And this is a problem with some other machines in this price range too. The aforementioned Dirt Devil Breeze has that problem as well. And in both the case of this and that machine, there is a bagged variant, but I've never used the bagged variant of this machine, so I can only comment on the bagless variant in terms of its filtration. However, I can say with 100% certainty that the bagged version does filter better than this bagless version. So if you somehow have the option to get either the bagged or the bagless version of this machine, get the bagged one, because you're going to have much better filtration. In the case of both this and the aforementioned Dirt Devil, I don't know of any good way to find HEPA bags for those machines, but if you were somehow able to find HEPA bags in that exact style, that would greatly improve filtration, but it still wouldn't address the lack of a final filter to at the very least catch the carbon dust coming off of the machine. So that's not a very good look, but for this price range and for what you would expect, 15 odd years ago, it's really not out of the ordinary, but it is still disappointing. Now, as far as actually emptying this machine and cleaning out the filter and all that, there's just a little switch right here that you push this button and then all the dirt falls out. Now, you want to do this outside because you're going to have to tap out this filter as well. And if you're only emptying the dirt, sometimes you can get away with emptying it inside as long as you do it in a way where it's not making a big cloud of dust. But the only real way to do that is if you have the bin all the way down into the trash can. And the only real way to accomplish that is if the actual emptying switch was up here on the top like it is on a Dyson. But on this particular machine, you have to get your fingers right next to where the trap door opens, which means you have to have this, either you have to stick your hand all the way down into the garbage can, or you have to have this hovering over the garbage can, and that'll make emptying this a very, very negative process, especially if you have allergies. If you have allergies or even are remotely concerned with filtration, this machine is a non-starter. Don't even consider it as a daily machine. Now, as far as accessing this filter, you can twist this right here. There's a little lock and an unlock icon right here, and you can see right now it's in the lock position. So if I grab this and I twist it, I can pull this right off, and here we have access to the filter. You can also dump this cup the old-fashioned way if you want to. And here's the filter. It just twists right off. I don't want to twist it off right now because this is getting a lot of dust into the air. But this filter is generally not washable. The instructions right here actually do say that some versions of this filter are washable, but it's really not. If you have another vacuum cleaner, ideally a bagged vacuum cleaner, you can actually vacuum off this filter. But otherwise, you're really going to have to change this filter almost, unless you have another vacuum that you can vacuum this off with, then you might be able to get away with replacing this about every 6 months to a year. But if you have no way to vacuum this off and you're only tapping out this filter, then you're going to have to probably replace this every 3 to 6 months, depending on your usage, at least if you want to actually maintain suction, because this is one of the few machines where you actually do lose suction as a result of this filter. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not as bad as people say. It's not like you suck up a little bit of dust and this thing has no suction whatsoever and is useless, but you do see a degradation in performance if you're using this as you fill up this cup. There is a fill line right here, right where the filter starts, so that would be about the time that you would want to empty this. And once you line this back up, you line up the unlock portion and twist it and lock it back into place, but just not really wanting to go all the way back. There we go. Hear that click, and now it's back into place. So, and also, like I was going to mention, if you, for whatever reason, don't want to tap out this filter, then you're really going to have to change this about every two or 3 months. I'd say probably every 3 months if you don't want to even attempt to clean out this filter and you just want to trash it every time it gets dirty, then you're going to have to replace it at least every 3 months in order to maintain performance. And now that's the thing, because not every vacuum with this design is like that. The more expensive Eureka Whirlwind Lightspeed isn't nearly as bad. The Dirt Devil Breeze that I just mentioned isn't nearly as bad. Those filters can stay dirty for a lot longer and still maintain airflow and suction, which is something that this machine struggles a bit. Again, it's still not perfect, but by today's standards, it's certainly unacceptable. But by 2005, 2004 standards, it's about what you would expect. So being a primitive budget bagless machine with no cyclone and no filtration other than one filter that does all the heavy lifting, you're going to need to do a lot of maintenance with this machine, and it's going to be a headache as well, and you're going to have to change belts as well. Now, the one thing that is nice about this machine when compared to the Dirt Devil Breeze that I mentioned is that this machine does not eat through belts nearly as bad as that machine does, because this machine has a proper height adjustment, so you can actually adjust it to the right surface, and you're not constantly leaving it on the lowest possible setting, so the belt does last a lot longer than the Dirt Devil. That Dirt Devil would probably last about a month tops on most carpeting. This belt will actually last you about every 6 months to maybe like 8 months to a year, depending on your usage. And this takes the Eureka Style U belt, and I forgot to mention that this takes the Eureka Style DCF4 or DCF18 filter, depending on which model you have. But it is easy enough to find the belts. I haven't looked to see if those filters are easy to find. I know I don't have any in stock right now, otherwise I would sell this with a brand new filter. But since I don't have a brand new filter to put in this machine, when I do sell it, I will clean out that filter to the best of my abilities. And it will still restore 97% of the suction. So As long as you clean it out every time, then you can keep the suction restored on this machine. But again, you can only do that so many times before you have to change this filter. So, and I just mentioned the belts as well. This takes Eureka style U belts. It has a wooden brush roller right here on the bottom, and this does a pretty decent job at grooming the carpet. And these brush rollers I haven't really been able to find, but I haven't really looked too hard, to be honest. If I can find replacement brush rollers, I will link that in the description. Any replenishment parts that I can find for this machine, I will link in the description in case you have one of these that maybe isn't in the best condition and you want to kind of put some new parts in and give it a new lease on life. That is an option. None of these wheels are rubber coated in traditional budget upright fashion, so again, not recommended for any sort of hard flooring. Now, as far as the rear of the machine, we do have a release pedal right down here. You push that, goes down, you push it again, and you can go flat. Again, a lot of other machines in this price range do that. A lot of the Bissells and Hoovers of a similar design do this as well, but since this is bagless, it won't go as far as some other machines. But as far as getting underneath my basic Walmart coffee table, it does that just fine. And for me, that's the only real type of table I would need to be getting underneath anyways. So this isn't really a problem for me. But if you have a lot of little furniture you're trying to get under, this might not be the best option for you unless you want to pull the hose out and use some extension wands and a floor nozzle to do that every single time you want to get underneath those types of furniture. And of course, it does have a double click, so it clicks right up into place. I have noticed that these pedals are a lot more sturdy than the Bissell pedals of the same era. But these still do sometimes tend to fail if you're really rough with these pedals. But they are a little bit more reliable than the Bissells. I would say probably slightly less reliable than the equivalent Hoover Tempo or Wind Tunnel. But they're about what you expect. This is realistically the only part that's going to fail on this machine with basic use, because the rest of it is actually not built that badly. Considering how cheap this machine was when it was new, the actual build quality isn't as bad as you would think. Yeah, no, that's proper grammar. So it's actually not too incredibly bad. Now, as far as looking at the back of the machine, we do have a cord hook right down here, and this actually does swivel. Let me make sure this is still in frame. Yes, it is. So we do have a cord hook right down here, and this does actually swivel, and it's the lower cord hook that swivels this time. So you can easily turn this upwards and pull the entire cord off. So the way that this works is when you have this down, you actually wrap the cord around this clip, and this little handle right here, this is actually the carrying handle for the machine, along with the stair cleaning handle. You can actually carry it by both handles if you like. And this machine isn't too heavy either. It's a relatively lightweight machine, still heavier than the equivalent Bissell or the Dirt Devil Breeze, but it's, again, not too bad when you consider with other machines on the market. You actually wrap the cord wrap around the actual carrying handle, so that's pretty interesting. So you wrap that around just like that, and you would continuously wrap that around until you run out of cable, and then you would turn this on the bottom here, and that would allow you to pull the entirety of the cable off. If you look, there is also a few sets of cord hooks, as the cord actually comes right out here. You can see this is where the cord comes out. So there's a cord wrap right here, right next to the carrying handle, and there's another one right up here at the top of the handle. So that is relatively nice. While the cord does come out very low, you can mount the cord pretty high up and keep it out of the way. But of course, as a result, you do lose some of your cord, but that comes with the territory of cheap machines like this. And the cord is relatively short. It's very typical for the machine in this price range. It's about 23-25 feet. I don't remember the exact length off the top of my head, but if I can find that information, I will add that in the description as well. But it's somewhere around that. It's certainly well below 30 feet, so you will have to unplug and replug depending on your house setup and how many outlets you have. Well, I guess it wouldn't matter how many outlets you have because you would still run out of space if you're moving it over a large surface area. So there is that. And of course the dusting brush, like I mentioned, stores on this peg right up here, and the extension wand and crevice tool hook in right here. And of course that gets stuck. But yeah, and that slots in just like that. So that's pretty typical. The power switch is right down here, so it is a foot operated power switch. It can be sometimes a bit awkward to get to since the hose is right in the way of it. but it's not too bad. You can still get to it just fine. In traditional Eureka fashion, these power switches have a known habit of failing on these, which is not great. I greatly prefer the power setup on something like the Hoover Tempo or the Abyssal Power Force bagged, where the power switch is a rocker switch on the side of the machine. I greatly prefer that to any sort of foot switch, not only because it's still a little bit more convenient and a little bit easier to find, it also, since it's a rocker switch, it's less prone to failure, and you can instantly tell by looking at it what position it's in. Whereas this one, it's not very easy to tell whether this is on or off. So if you're plugging it in and you left it on the last time, granted that probably doesn't happen too often, but it still is something that is a bit annoying in my opinion. Now, as far as the hose, so the hose comes off right here at the bottom. So you have to bend all the way down to the floor to pull this hose out. And then there's a hook right here. Move the cord out of the way. A hook right above here. A hook right down here. And then there's a final hook right below here, which looks like it's fixed, but this hook is actually malleable. It's a very soft, rubbery plastic, so you actually can bend this out of the See, this kind of shows the problem that I was talking about, where the switch is way too close to this hose, because I actually tried to push the hose down, and I ended up pressing the switch. See? Yeah, I just did it again. So if you want to pull the hose out of this bracket, you can, but it's really awkward, and you are going to probably end up turning on the machine. This hose is a decently wide diameter. I do notice a lot of dust gets on the end of this hose, but of course that's easy enough to wipe off. And if you do get a clog in this hose, since it's not a stretch hose, it's pretty easy to clean this out since there's not really any give to it. So it's a lot easier to unclog this. And there are two screws right here that allow you to pull off this hose and stick a broom handle down it or something if something gets stuck in it. So it is pretty easy to clear this out with not too much fuss. So that is that. And I'm going to carefully put this back in here. There we go. And clip right there, clip up here, clip right here, and then slot it in right down there. And that pretty much takes care of the hose. Now, one more thing I will mention about the hose that is a bit peculiar about this machine. So I have a assortment of attachments right here, and I'll demonstrate this issue with these attachments. So here's a wide array of attachments. Now, you might not be able to see that. Here, I'll just move this out of the way. So here is a wide range of attachments. Now, what do these attachments have all in common? Well, what these attachments have in common is that these are a standard 1¼ fitting. They're universal attachments, so they have a universal fitting that the vast majority of vacuum cleaners and platforms use. Now, in theory, that should mean that all of those should fit on this machine, because after all, one of these is a Eureka attachment, and we already established that this does fit this. So that means that this is a standard 1¼ fitting on the end of this hose, so that should mean that anything should fit on the end of it, right? Well, you would hope so, because that is the case with the Hoover Tempo that I just mentioned. Now, in the case of the Hoover Tempo, it is I don't know how to describe this, but the way that it works, just like the Hoover Tempo, is that the actual hose fits over the attachment instead of inside of it. So unlike something like the Eureka SmartVac or the Eureka Excalibur that I mentioned, it is a little bit harder to find tools to fit this, despite these all being a standard 1¼ fitting. Now, if you do get one of those, if you use the extension wand that this machine comes with, it does not change the ability to have any of these fit on it versus the actual hose, which I will demonstrate right now. But if you do get one of the extension wands from one of the other machines that I mentioned, like the Eureka Mighty Mite, or in some cases the Eureka Boss SmartVac or Excalibur, those machines, when you put the extension wand on, it does turn it into an internal fitting. And then at that point, all of these attachments would fit. So the only reason I don't show that is because my Mighty Mite's in the basement. I don't feel like going down there to grab the extension wand, but you kind of get an idea about what I'm saying. So this Eureka tool that doesn't normally come with this fits just fine. It's a little stiff. It doesn't really go in there all the way, but it's enough. Nice soft dusting brush, works great. We have a Eureka Turbo tool. This comes with one of the Eureka models that actually replaced this, although this is one that's still discontinued. This one, the hose actually fits both inside and over it, and it's even the matching green color. So this works really well, fits on perfectly as you'd expect. This is a really nice turbo tool. You can flip this down and up. These Eureka turbo tools are actually pretty interesting because of this riser visor feature. So you can actually clean the backs of stairs with this or upholstery. So that's actually a pretty interesting feature. So that does fit just fine. So you can buy Eureka attachments to upgrade this. But what about attachments from different companies? Well, I just mentioned Hoover. This is one of the attachments that would come with the Hoover vacuum, like the Hoover Tempo that I just mentioned. This doesn't quite fit. It's just barely not right, but it doesn't fit. And then here's a universal dusting brush. This is designed to go with many, many different machines. Universal, designed to fit with all sorts of different machines, not brand specific. This, again, doesn't quite fit. It's almost there. It really wants to, but it's not quite good enough. I mean, you can kind of get it like that, but that's just going to fall right off. And finally, here's a dusting brush from a Dyson DC07. And again, this one actually kind of fits. See, look. And sure, it's not in there very far, but it fits enough to where if you're very light with it, it will work. So the actual attachment fitting on this, despite being 1.25 inches, is very deceiving, and you're not going to be able to expand your attachment portfolio with this machine as easily as you would many other machines like Hoover vacuums that this would be competing with that also use that same 1.25 inch fitting. So the attachments that this machine comes with are very mediocre, and at least in terms of the actual upholstery and dusting tools, and there's really not much that you can do as far as expansion outside of the Eureka brand. And of course, since none of these ride on board, unless you actually forego some of the attachments that this machine comes with on board, then you're going to have a relatively hard time in terms of using any sort of expanded capabilities with this machine, again, outside of something that is branded as Eureka. It's also important to note that the modern Eureka vacuums that are made by Medea have an entirely different attachment fitting that are much more similar to what you would find on a Bissell or a Panasonic, not what you would find in front of you. So, what's my final conclusion about the Eureka 4703 Boss Power Plus? Well, my conclusion is kind of interesting because I do have some history with this machine. In fact, this was the yellow version of this that was sold under the Lightspeed name. Again, not Whirlwind Lightspeed, but just Eureka Lightspeed. I had one of those back in the day. I had one brand new in the box. I got it in, I think, 2010. It was brand new in the box. It was after they got rid of the headlight and the belt window, and I got it brand new in the box, and I sold it very shortly after at a garage sale. And the reason I did that is because at the time I already had a different vacuum. I had the Bissell Power Force bagged model 3522-5. It's actually the only vacuum from that time period that I still have that exact machine to this day. And I got rid of it in favor of the Bissell. And the reason I did that is because I felt like the Bissell performed a little bit better, and at the very least it was on par. It was just as easy to adapt it to use on bare floors as this machine was. The Bissell was lighter weight, had better filtration, was easier to find parts for at my local Walmart. Of course, me being a kid at the time, there really isn't much I can do other than just buy parts for my vacuum whenever I'm going grocery shopping with my family. And it was overall much quieter, much lighter weight, easier to use, and overall had better build quality with the exception of the pedal and more features than this machine, and it was cheaper to boot. So I really do think that while this isn't the worst option that you could have gotten back in the day, I think nowadays if you have this machine, I think it's time to move on. Now, if you're a vacuum collector and you grew up with one of these and you really want to find one again, well, great, because I'm selling this one. But if you're just a normal person who's looking for a machine to use, if you find this thing for really cheap at a thrift store and you need something to do a decent job at cleaning your carpets and that's all you care about, then this will do pretty okay. And this is certainly a good, at least stopgap machine to use in the meantime, so you have something to use until you get yourself something nicer. But overall, if I was shopping for a vacuum cleaner in the anywhere from like the $40 to $70 price range back in anywhere from 2006 to like 2009, this would not be my pick. There would be plenty of other machines that I would pick over this, And unfortunately, that seems like a trend that Eureka has kind of found themselves in to this day, which I think explains why you don't see a lot of Eureka machines in big box stores anymore unless you happen to find yourself in the vacuum aisle of the random Home Depot. So, while this machine isn't horrendous in terms of its ability to clean carpets, its tools are relatively lackluster. The machine is horribly noisy, and you don't really get a lot of performance back in exchange for that level of noise. The filtration is god awful even back then, and it's even worse by today's standards. And overall, it's just not the best machine to use. It is a decently lightweight vacuum, and the build quality isn't the worst, but it's still overall not my pick for a budget bagless vacuum from the early 2000s. So, would I pick one up at a thrift store? Obviously not. The only reason I even have this one is because I got it for free, and even that is personally a too high of a price for this machine, so it will be going away. And hopefully someone will adopt this machine and put it into their collection, or maybe even put it into daily use, and hopefully it can have a second lease on life in its Frankenstein form. Now, this is not me slamming the Eureka name, because the upgraded version of this, the Eureka Whirlwind Lightspeed that I have, is an amazing machine, and I will review that one of these days because it has all the same benefits that this machine does in terms of its ability to deep clean carpets. It's just as lightweight, the build quality is much better, it's much quieter, filtration's better, and it even has an onboard self-cleaning duster. Like, how can you not love that? So this is not me not liking Eureka, because I do legitimately love my Whirlwind Lightspeed. This machine just unfortunately does not cut the cake. So, like I mentioned before, this will be up for sale on my OfferUp page. In fact, it already is. So I'm Intelitech Studios on OfferUp, and I might list this on Facebook Marketplace as well, but it just depends. Either way, if you want this machine, let me know, and I can arrange for you to buy this lovely thing. I'll clean it up and send it off to you. So, anyways, this is Intelitech Studios signing out with my full review of the Eureka TheBoss Power Plus Model 4703. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful, and I will see you guys in the next video. I hope you guys enjoyed this and found it helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one. Peace.